This video has been produced to help take you through filling in the business as usual estimator. It aims to provide a helpful overview of how to navigate the estimator, what to fill in, and in what order. For more detailed support with specific inputs and how the tool works, check out the combined estimator user guide below. You'll probably be looking to use the business as usual tool in the preliminary stages when developing your decarbonisation strategy. It's a useful starting point as it helps provide a breakdown of your organisation's baseline emissions to identify any large emitters and determine the order of priority for tackling buildings or sites across your estate. Once your baseline emissions have been calculated, these are then projected forward to give your future emissions trajectory and cost burden if no action is taken. This provides a counterfactual to measure the impact of interventions against when you move on to fill in the interventions estimator. Before you go ahead and start filling in the tool, you'll need to first decide which baseline year you'll be using for gathering all of your data. Ideally, you'd pick the most recent year you have access to data for. However, if this doesn't reflect your typical annual emissions, you may wish to take an average over the last couple of years. Just make sure each year consists of 12 consecutive months' worth of data to capture seasonality. You should also make sure you have access to energy consumption figures for each site or building across your estate. This might require you to request data from energy suppliers or find bills in advance of filling the estimator in. Or you can fill parts in, save, and come back at a later date if additional data is required. Once you've had a read through of the User Notes tab, you'll be ready to move on and start inputting your data for your estate. This may look a bit overwhelming at first, but we're going to break it down column by column, and this is the same example used in the combined estimator user guide, so make sure to have a look at that after watching this video. First thing to note is that all of these pink cells you can see across the board are ones that allow user input, and then some cells have been greyed out and you don't need to worry about these ones, and it'll become clear why in a minute. So what we're going to do is we're going to start right over on the left-hand side. And in this example, we're looking at a healthcare estate. So some of the building names and use categories might not be relevant for your estate, and that's fine. So first thing you need to do is detail each of the sites across your estate and then break these down into their respective buildings. You may have multiple buildings across multiple sites, so entering a reference code will help keep track of which buildings are linked. Then you need to make sure you've added a use category for each building and a gross internal area figure. And then finally, whether or not each building is part of a central heat network. In this example, we have two heat networks. One is Big Hill Health Centre and one is University Town Hospital. The way to make sure you've captured this is to add in an extra row as part of that site and make sure the use category for that building is set as Energy Centre. You don't need to add any gross internal area data, but you do need to make sure that you have ticked yes in this column, and this is going to link our buildings that are part of the same heat network. The next step is to go ahead and detail any planned changes coming up to your estate. So in this example, a few buildings are going to be closed or demolished this year. And there's also a couple of new buildings that will be opening in 2028 or later. Once you've done this section, you're ready to move on and start inputting all of your energy consumption data. Here you'll be using your metered values and converting them to kilowatt hours across the board using conversion factors. We won't be going into detail here about how to do that, but again, make sure you have a look at the guide to help. For most of your buildings, this will be quite simple. You just move across the board, filling in the pink cells. However, where we have got the essential heat networks, you'll see that a lot of the columns are greyed out for the heating data. So what you want to do here is you want to make sure for your energy centre, we'll use Big Hill Health Centre as an example, that you have input your heating energy use data. So here we've got this figure. And then if this breakdown is known, you can input the split across the buildings in here. However, if it's not, just leave these blank and the model is going to estimate this for you based on the use category and gross internal area data you have provided. Another example of how this has been done is below for University Town Hospital. So the energy usage for heating has been input for the energy centre, and this has then been broken down across the buildings. Once you've done all of this and run through all of your buildings, you'll be ready to move on to the next tab. So the Selections tab is then going to ask you to input the consumption reference year that you used for gathering all of your energy data. Here I've used 2022 as that's the most recent year. However, as we discussed earlier, you want to make sure that you're using the most recent year that is also the most representative of your estate's typical emissions and has the best quality data. So yours may slightly be different here. The next step is to then add in a cost base for each of the fuels used across your estate. So you can use the drop-down arrow to move through the presets, and the table on the right-hand side will give you an indication as to what these are for each level. These values are taken from the Green Book. However, if you feel that these aren't very representative of your estate's fuel costs, then there's an option to select local. And then if you move through into the Assumptions tab, you can add in your own figures where the pink cells are. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to add in some random figures here. And then if I move back, I can see that this has been carried through into my table. For the example, moving forward, we're just going to go back to one of the presets. However, remember there's an option to do this. Once you've done all of this, you're going to need to click the Update Output button. And this is really important. If you don't do this, everything you filled in today isn't going to be carried forward. This may take a couple of seconds, so we're going to come back once this is updated. Once those updates have been carried out, you should automatically be taken through onto the Outputs tab, and this is where the fun begins. So across the top of the page, you should be able to see all of your different sites and buildings. And there's 4 initial graphs that cover demand, consumption, energy costs, and emissions business as usual forecasts up to 2050. These initial 4 give you the aggregate across your entire estate, so it covers all of your buildings and sites. However, if you want to break this down to the site or building level, there's optionality to do that by selecting the filters at the top of the page. So we're going to just do an example by selecting University Town Hospital. So if I do so, the forecast should be updated just for that particular site. And then if I want to look at a specific building within the site, I can do that. And again, it's broken down. And then if you want, you can further filter this by use, type, and energy source. The main thing to note here is if you want to go back and look at a different site, you're going to have to reset all of the filters. And to do so, you need to go back to Selections and click Update Output. Once that's done, if you go back and look at the Outputs tab again, all of the filters should have been reset. Once you've had a chance to digest your business as usual forecast across your estate, you may be starting to think about how interventions modelling could help with planning your decarbonisation strategy. So to make sure you're ready to go ahead and use that tool, you're going to need to go back to the Selections tab and export your data. The first thing to remember is that if you've made any changes to any of the figures on the Inputs tab or the Selections tab since you last clicked Update Output, you're going to have to go ahead and re-click the button before you click Export Data. If not, you can go straight ahead and select Export Data, and you should be able to see that a separate Excel spreadsheet has been generated. So if you go ahead and click on that, you'll be able to see that it's pulled through all of your business as usual forecasts for each of your buildings across all of your sites. And this is going to be really important for directly inputting into the interventions tool. So make sure you save it and keep it handy. And when you are ready to move on and start looking at the interventions modelling, make sure to read the relevant section of the combined user guide and also watch the video. And if you've got any further questions, feel free to reach out at psdecarbguidance@es.catapult.org.uk.